Hey everyone, this is Mary. We're back with a new kind of episode today. We teased in the mailbag episode that we wanted to do some care and keeping of you shows based on topics of interest to our listeners. We've heard from many of you about the ways the Josefina books made you think about grief, both how it's depicted in the books and how it made you reflect on moments of grief in your own lives. We heard from a listener who is interested in sharing her knowledge on this, and she graciously made time to talk to us about how grief plays out in these books and how we might be kind to ourselves and our friends who are grieving. Our guest is Allison Merrick, a psychotherapist in private practice specializing in shame, trauma, and eating disorders. She is also clinical director of an eating disorder treatment center in Houston, Texas. Let's go now to our conversation with Allison Merrick. Hey, Allison, this is Mary.
Hi. Oh my God, I'm like fangirling right now.
Oh my gosh. Hi. I'm here with other equally prestigious Allison.
Hi, Allison.
Hi.
This is a real meeting of the minds. Like, I can't believe I have these two Allisons together with me now, and you both spell it the same way, which is wonderful.
The correct way.
Yes. And I recently chopped all my hair off in January. And so I relate to your hair, like, I don't want to name it a struggle for you, but like your attachment to your hair and your like creativity. And yes, like, yes.
Okay. So let me just first say, we're so grateful to have you on our show, that you reached out to us on our social media and we were able to connect with you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I am so excited to talk like all the things I love. I feel like 9-year-old Allison would be very proud. So I'm excited to be here.
Wow. Well, we're happy to meet 9-year-old Allison and adult Allison and talk about all the things that you love. So just to kind of get started, I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about yourself, and most importantly, and this is a loaded question, so feel free to take some time with this. Which character do you feel the strongest affinity for? And has this changed or evolved at all since you were 9-year-old Allison?
Yes. So I'm a therapist. I'm trained as a licensed clinical social worker. And I work as clinical director at an eating disorder treatment center. And then I also have a private practice where I specialize in eating disorders and shame and in trauma. And so though as a child, Molly through and through Molly. I identified in so many ways with Molly. And even looking back on my childhood, I mean, I am definitely a Molly. But I've got to tell you, in reading Josefina now, Josefina came out like a couple years like past my American Girl prime. But reading about her now, I'm kind of having an identity crisis because I feel like I was in some ways like a Josefina on the inside with like a Molly on the outside, which seems very like quite a paradox, but that's kind of where I lived.
Wow. Can you maybe say more about that? What does that mean to be a Josefina on the inside and a Molly on the outside?
So I think that I really spent a lot of time, I think, absorbing a lot of people's emotions, really people watching a whole lot. And I think that's typically associated with people who are more introverted. But I think what I did with a lot of those feelings that I experienced and that I picked up on and that I was kind of a sponge for in a way that Josefina was, instead of going inward with that, I think I had a lot more kind of outward expressions of that. And I think my people pleasing came out in a very Molly-esque way where there was a lot of performing and a lot of achieving. And so I think it manifested itself differently. But I think like in Molly, you know, in Molly's birthday book, which, oh my gosh, yes, but you know what I'm saying, the birthday book, when she she shares her birthday party with Emily. And then she's, you know, really into it and really connecting and really feeling like like, I think there's just part of her that really feels like she's helping this person and is really taking a lot of pride in that. And then she reaches this point where she's like, I'm done here. I feel like I've given you my birthday party and I'm over it. I can really like kind of, yeah, I think I can kind of see that in that example.
That's entirely fair. I respect that.
Thank you. Do y'all have an identity crisis? Like with any, because I know y'all are both Molly's, but I'm wondering if there's another one that's like your number two.
Allison, any thoughts on that?
I think from starting the podcast to now, we've reeled back a lot of our other, I will say, conceptions or misconceptions about the dolls, because we get flooded with messages almost daily with people bringing up things that we don't remember. And we've said before that with Kirsten, one of the first things that happened was, you know, people to us, friends, kind of half jokingly called us monsters because we had forgotten about all the death and trauma that she experiences. And we both just only remembered the St. Lucia plotline.
Right, we blocked it all out.
So I'm most excited, I have to say, for Kit, because the passion that people bring when talking about Kit is Molly.
Yeah, and that was after my time. So it's kind of like I've never read Josefina before this, and it will be my first time reading the Kit books when we get there. So I'm excited to kind of go on that journey. Who knows? I mean, I'm having an identity crisis, just generally speaking, probably every day. So in terms of AG associations, it's like I can't even begin.
So this is what has gotten me started on this, like trying to identify each American Girl's Enneagram type. Because so the Enneagram, it's this personality kind of, it's not really a test because it really does have to do with more like reading and self-identification. The tests are just a tool, but it's a model for personality types. And it started off in it has very spiritual and Christian origins actually, but it's become much more secular through the years and is used a lot in like leadership coaching and things like that. And then there's 9 personality types, and there can be some overlap. So if you're a 2 personality type, you might have aspects of like a 1 or a 3. And like each number has a type that they go to in growth and then a type that they go to in stress. And so I was thinking about this whole like Josefina Molly thing and kind of like how each American Girl has things in common despite being so different. And so that's why I like got into this whole like, oh my gosh, I wonder what the Enneagram types are. So if anybody's like an Enneagram expert, like I would love to know. I think it could like definitely deepen the understanding of all the American Girls.
So since we reposted your post about that, we've gotten a lot of
Really?
hot takes. And what's been kind of interesting is, well, people have pretty much all picked different numbers for each AG. So there hasn't been consistency, but Josefina has been pegged by a few people as a 2.
That's the most obvious.
So I don't know
that's
if that
the most
means
obvious.
anything. Okay.
And the 2 is the helper. The 2 is the personality type. I'm a 2 wing 3, and I think Josefina's a 2 and Molly's a 3, which it makes sense when I think of it in that way. But a 2 is the personality type that like I said, they're referred to as the helper. And they really get a lot of their identity and their self-worth from helping. And it kind of left to their own devices, or when we 2s aren't being very mindful, we can often give and give and give at the expense of ourselves, or it can become a way to distract from what's really going on with us. And I think we can see that play out in Josefina, that her way of coping with this grief is through helping, and there can be wonderful, healthy things about that. But I think we see, I mean, it's become Josefina's sort of default, and we're all sort of like, Josefina's the child here, like who's there for her. And so I don't know, I fear for grown-up Josefina, and like, how is she going to learn to really ask for what she needs and wants?
So you're bringing up a lot of issues that we've been thinking a lot about and we really want to get into with you. So I'm not even sure how to get into this because there's so much to cover, but you've kind of told us a bit about what you do professionally, but I'm wondering if you could get into, maybe before we get into the books, what kind of inspired your work, because we're hoping to kind of talk with you about how our readers might process grief and shame and all these things that show up in the book in healthy ways, and then kind of have you sort of interpret what's happening in the books that you see as a professional.
So I actually started off, I was very, very into theater growing up. I went to the High School for the Performing and Visual Arts here in Houston. I went to the Boston Conservatory of Music for my first year of college, which is now part of Berklee College of Music. And I loved it. And then I went to kind of my junior year of high school. Actually, I had this experience where I was volunteering at Texas Children's Hospital here in the medical center. And I was working, I think I was just in like the playroom on like the cancer floor, which is where I was, doing my volunteering. And I had this moment where I was like, oh no, I like this more than I like theater. What am I going to do? Because it was my life. It was my identity. And I didn't want to disappoint people. And I was just terrified at the thought that like I liked something else more than that. So I did what I was supposed to do. I went on, I graduated, went to Boston. And then after like a year and a half, I was just really miserable. And it actually manifested itself in an eating disorder at that point. And so I came home, and at first I majored in education. And then when I was interning, I did an internship at Teach for America. And for me, I realized like, okay, well, I think if I were a teacher, we would be talking about feelings all day long and no one would like pass their exam. So that's probably not going to work. But in all seriousness, I just think that I was really interested in helping children address like the really hard barriers like that they were having in their life related to trauma and anxiety and depression and their home environments. And so I switched to psychology. And then I found my way into social work through Brene Brown. I don't know if y'all are familiar with her, but I highly recommend that everyone kind of look her up, watch her TED Talk, read her books. She, at the time, well, she still is a professor at the University of Houston, but she wasn't like a New York Times bestseller at the time. And I went to one of her talks here in Houston and I was like, oh my gosh, what do you do for a living? And she is a social worker. And so we kind of kept in touch, and I studied abroad in South Africa. And I was really, really just inspired by her work on shame and vulnerability and connection. And so I got my master's in social work. And then I really wanted to work in kind of general mental health and like underserved populations. And I ended up back working in eating disorders, really kind of no real intention of doing so. But somebody contacted me and there was a job position open. And I was like, okay, I guess we'll kind of come full circle with this. So that's how I became a therapist. And really, people ask me a lot, how does theater relate to that? And I think theater taught me empathy. Theater taught me the power of story. Theater taught me how to really look at, like, even in some of the most like deep, like the darkest kind of places, what is the nature of kind of love in that? Like, what are people really after? And really at the end of the day, like even some of the most difficult people are really in search of connection. So that's what really, how I became a therapist. It's a very long answer, but it usually is for most people.
I think that was really helpful. And you really brought up the next topic that we wanted to get into, which was shame. And we've talked a lot on the show about the ways in which Josefina's feelings of shame manifest. And the most obvious example is when she literally is screaming to herself, shame, 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 after what's basically a minor incident. And she's not quite a tween yet. She's still young. She's 10 years old at that point. And so I know she's not billable. She's not a billable client for you. But what are some ways, if you could talk back to Josefina, like she leaves Santa Fe. She's somehow in Texas after 1848 with you. What are some ways that you could talk to her or to even young people about healthy ways to process shame?
So here are the biggest kind of steps towards staying resilient to shame. And really, shame is the fear of disconnection. So anybody that has the capacity for empathy is going to have some shame. Because if we want relationships, we're going to fear losing it. And as humans, we are social creatures who are dependent upon connection for survival. So first I would tell Josefina, I would say, it's not so much about getting rid of your shame as it is working to stay resilient to that feeling of being not good enough and therefore unworthy of love and belonging, to staying resilient to that belief when it comes up rather than trying to get rid of it completely. And so the first step in staying resilient to shame is actually doing what Josefina did, which is speaking and recognizing it. The fact that a 10-year-old girl can identify that she's in shame and kind of say it out loud to herself is actually, as sad as it is and as painful as it is, especially when this is, like you said, just such a harmless thing, and she's just putting so much pressure on herself. It's hard to hear her do, but it's very, very adaptive that she's able to say shame, 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 that she's able to have the awareness to know where she's at in that moment. And then also, I think another thing to do kind of more preemptively is really, know kind of what your shame triggers are. And so those really lie in how do we want to be seen versus how we don't want to be seen. So one question I would have for Josefina would be how did that instance come up against a wanted identity or an unwanted identity for you? And yes, because when we know that information on the front end, we can be more resilient maybe to some of those very intense emotional reactions that shame can bring up. And then the third really important thing is self-compassion. Talking to ourselves like we would talk to somebody that we love, which I think that I want so much more of that for Josefina, for her to give herself the kindness that she gives other people. And then the next step is being able to practice vulnerability and receive empathic support from really safe and trustworthy people. And in the book, it sort of happens. She doesn't have to go as much sort of into a really vulnerable space in order to do that, because Tia Dolores kind of shows up for her in that moment. But, when Josefina's older, she's not going to have she might not have her sisters as close by, or Tia Dolores sort of showing up in those moments without her having to ask for it. So a big skill that we teach is around being able to ask for support and pick up that phone in really hard times and to talk about the shame that's coming up with other people. Because when we're not resilient to our shame, we have a fight, flight, or freeze response, which you can see played out for Josefina.
Well, yeah, she flees Tia Magdalena's home after smashing that medicine jar, and then Tia Dolores comforts her. So that seems like a key moment in what you're describing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then she's even starting to question her worth as a potential healer. And it really, shame makes us question who we are as people, which is why it's so dangerous. But I do think that, Tia Dolores gave her really wonderful wisdom, and that I forget what the exact line is, but about second chances. And so I just think that was great advice. I have such issue with the thought of Tia Dolores being a serial killer, because because I can't accept it.
Do you think? But is this Stockholm syndrome? Are you just?
It would just, not so much Stockholm syndrome. It would just break my heart for little Josefina if like this woman who shows up for her in so many ways is so like evil. It would be a whole other loss for Josefina that like I just, it would break my heart. It would break my heart. That's why I think I'm in some denial about the potential of Tia Dolores being a serial killer.
I mean, is this where we encourage you to acknowledge your denial and, you know, like reach out to us with some vulnerability?
Yes. And I'm feeling some shame about like, about like my level of denial. Like I should wake up and just acknowledge it and like be more emotionally strong because I'm a therapist and everything. But like, so thank you for letting me speak my shame in like a safe place.
That's why we're here. That's why we're
thanks.
here. I mean, what would you say to Floresita right now, like defending Tia Dolores? Like, just think about that. I don't know. I mean, maybe just like you need to meditate on that for
I think I need to think about it a little bit.
Can I pivot us to someone else who may or may not be as sinister as Tia Dolores for a hot sec? And that is international thought leader Valerie Tripp. In many ways, the most tragic event in this entire series happens before we even meet this family, and that's the death of the mother. And so I kind of just want to like break the fourth wall with you and have you kind of think through with us what you make of the fact that Valerie Tripp chose to have a maternal death be so critical to this entire story arc.
Well, I think just acknowledging that, I mean, art is personal and writing and, you know, a form of art, and that this relates to Valerie Tripp in some way. It reflects her, some part of her somehow. I don't know Valerie Tripp, obviously, and so I don't want to speculate too much, but I think I wonder if she was maybe possibly grieving someone in her life at the time. And this is how she coped with that for herself.
I think honestly, a more generous reading than we have usually given in, you know, in partially trying to be humorous and in looking at this is there is something provocative to thinking about the fact that Josefina does not grow up in a family that has a mother, a father, and siblings, as many of the other American girls do. And this being a later part of Tripp's contributions to the series, it is actually quite thoughtful that she does write about a person who lacks a maternal figure, much in the same way that Molly is lacking her father because he's away in the war. But it probably made Josefina relatable to a lot more kids, even those who maybe hadn't lost a mother to death, but who lived in what some people would call a non-traditional, but I think normative situation now, which is not necessarily growing up with a mother and a father in the sense that people once thought of.
Yes. Another thing that comes to mind is how Tia Dolores comes in and in a way seems to like kind of put a Band-Aid on things. And I am not in any way saying that like these stories aren't full of pain and sadness and grief. Like there's nothing that can ever completely like take away that the pain of death, obviously. But I do think that it's sort of like a bit of a fantasy in a way of like, okay, someone like not every child whose mother dies has someone to kind of like arrive unexpectedly and fill that hole as much as Tia Dolores attempts to, either in, you know, the reasons behind that can be exact, you know, there's a lot of speculation around that, of course. But so I'm almost like, okay, is this sort of like the ideal way in which Valerie Tripp would have liked to experienced a loss that she's experienced, like someone to kind of come in and fix everything and make the family structure like come back together. So that's another thought that I had. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it does. I mean, it kind of feels like almost a Mary Poppins fantasy, like this sort of supernatural almost person comes in and heals the family, not just one person grieving, but kind of enters the family system and fixes everything.
Yes. And not everybody has that. But then there's also something that can maybe, you know, I can envision a girl reading this who whose mother has died, or who maybe doesn't have like a relationship with her mother, whose mother's out of the picture, and that this could maybe inspire her to kind of be open to those sorts of like relationships with older women and find those role models. And but still, it gets to a level in this book where it does feel very supernatural.
There's also the total lack of father figure despite him being alive. And the more you think about it, he's really not emotionally available to the family. And then I think part of why the details that come out about him as we're kind of evaluating him as a Dolores suitor feel so strange. It's because we just know next to nothing about him. And the way the family is structured, we know literally nothing about Anna's husband. Right. Her sons are kind of thrown in the last book, and Abuelito is literally absent most
He's
of their
a complete
lives.
mystery.
So one of my biggest questions was like, where does Papa like get his support? And I think that says so much about the time period. I think it also says so much about the pressure of like men to like hold it all together emotionally, and how that can lead to so much shutdown and distance, and therefore really hurt girls and women.
I also think it's probably reflective of when we've talked a bit in the past, and pretty much anything you read about the process of writing these books bears this out. You know, Valerie Tripp was rightfully very proud of having talked to a lot of women about their grandmothers, and that she spent a lot of time in salons in New Mexico connecting with people. And you wonder if part of what comes out in this book is just a lack of knowledge about men.
Yeah, I think
that sounded way
no. I actually think that's a really good point, because if that's who her research base is, so to speak, then that's the thing that she has authority to speak on, I guess. But also, like, I mean, from your perspective, Allison, do you find that there is a gendered breakdown in men's willingness to kind of be vulnerable around grief or around shame, or the things that these books get at?
Absolutely. Like, you know, for example, there's been a big increase in men seeking treatment for an eating disorder. And it's so hard to discern, okay, is this that there actually is an increase in the presentation of eating disorders in men, or is this that men finally feel safe enough within our culture to seek help? And I really think for mental health in general, I think it's that men are just now kind of finally feeling like, okay, it's safe for me as a man to go to therapy. It's safe for me as a man to get that sort of emotional support from other men. I mean, there's this like, you know, as hard as vulnerability is for women, I think for men, it's been particularly ingrained in most men. Like, do not show weakness, do not show how you feel. And again, that really breeds shame. And when we're in shame, we're not going to be as connected to our families and to the people who we love. I think women have been very socialized throughout time, you know, like meeting in circle, meeting in salons, just having these meeting places to connect. And I think for men haven't had as many of those spaces.
Yeah, that
for
makes
that
sense.
Focus on like emotional connection.
So I'm wondering, what are some, if you're thinking through the books, I guess we kind of would love your thoughts on what are some healthy ways that you see the family grieving and less healthy ways?
First of all, let me start by saying this. Grief is messy. And I think that healthy ways of coping and grieving should look kind of messy. You know, I think there's a lot of there are a lot of misconceptions around Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief, which, you know, is what most people think of when they think of healing from grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And the thing about those stages of grief, they weren't initially designed to describe people who were in bereavement. They were designed to describe people's experience after they themselves were diagnosed with a
Oh,
terminal
wow.
illness.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
You just blew my mind.
Yeah, it was mind blowing the first time that I heard that too. And I think they are still applicable, but there's even Kubler-Ross herself said that she never intended it to be sort of a, okay, step 1 check, step 2 check, step 3 check for, that they are more phases that people can cycle through and they can skip different stages. So I think that's something to keep in mind, that acceptance isn't a place of arrival. And so a model that I really like to use is Worden's 4 tasks of mourning. And the first task is to accept the reality of the new loss. The second is to work through the pain of grief. The third is to adjust to an environment in which the deceased person is not there. And 4 is to find an enduring connection, to the deceased while embarking on a new life. And so with those in mind, and keeping in mind that grief is inherently messy, one of the healthiest sort of movement through these tasks or these stages that I see in the book is in Clara, when she holds on to Nina. And I see that as really her working through the pain of grief. I see that as kind of working through this kind of denial, anger, bargaining. If I hold on to this doll, then things will be okay. There's just an authenticity about that I love. And I think it's one of the very few examples in the book of grief being a really inherently messy process. And then she finally, in moving through that, does move to a place of more acceptance, and that she finds this way to have that connection to her mom while embarking on a new life. And I think her finally giving Nina to Josefina, I think is a big symbol for that, that she has, in a sense, anchored that connection with Mama, and that she is embarking on a new life in giving the doll to its next rightful holder. And so I think that that's just a very healthy, very human expression of grief. I think we've talked about how Papa's grief, or unexpressed grief, has grief that feels really stuffed to me, I think has created a lot of distance. I think Josefina, I think there's sort of an emotional bypassing happening with her, where she's sort of, and she's a child, so it's so hard to, she's going through these stages and feeling these emotions to the extent at which she feels safe to do so. And to the extent in which she has an example for how to do it. But I think if Papa is so shut down in his own grief, I think that she too is sort of stuffing down her own grief as well, and kind of trying to move right towards acceptance, or right towards okay, Mama's not here anymore, but she lives within our hearts. And we hear her say these things throughout the books that sound that are very wise, and that really would indicate a level of acceptance and adjustment and finding meaning and that connection to her mama. But I can't help but wonder, what is brewing beneath the surface in all of this?
Exactly. I think, to me, I was waiting for her to smash a plate. I mean, yes, she smashes the medicine jar, but that was an accident. It actually leads to this huge shame moment. But just something where it's you externalize what you're feeling internally, that would have felt honest to me. And again, I don't know anything about healthy ways to process grief, but yeah, I was just feeling I wanted something as a reader that didn't feel like a performance.
Yes. She is, in these books, she is performing. She's not performing in literally tap dancing around like Molly does, but she performs in her making other people happy. In her trying to rescue and trying to save. And it's I want someone to be there for her. And so I have a theory. I think that out of all the American girls, the American Girl that I would worry the most about when it comes to developing an eating disorder would be Josefina.
Oh,
Wow. Can you say
Yeah.
more?
I think like we talked about the way that she like stuffs all of her feelings down. I think there's going to be years of like repressed emotion that hasn't had a catharsis. And so I think, I mean, that's the one big reason. The second is throughout these books, I hear her say things like, there were butterflies in my stomach and my stomach churned. And I felt this heavy chill down my spine. And it just, there was a lot of somatization of emotions, especially in her GI tract. And there's a lot of research that shows that people with eating disorders, particularly children with anorexia, have a higher rate of somatization of emotional experiences.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Nancy Zucker at Duke University has done a lot of research on this topic. And when I was reading through these Josefina books, I thought of her research and I was like, wow, I think that, that was my worry for Josefina.
Now, if you could imagine a more present friend for Josefina than her goat or Mariana, what would you want that friend to be like?
I would want that friend to be someone who is, first of all, I think fun, like teaching her how to have fun and how to enjoy herself, and fun that isn't attached to making somebody else happy. And I'd want that friend to really be a good listener for her. That's what I would want
And
for
I
her.
think, I'm just curious your thoughts because I think so many listeners of our show, and I know Allison and I personally too, we've all been people who've experienced grief. And I know that, when you personally experience grief, a lot of times you don't realize what's actually not comforting until people try to comfort you,
Mm-hmm.
saying things that are kind of offensive or just come off wrong, even if extremely well intended, like, I'm sure she's in a better place or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering, if we had this friend of Josefina, and for friends listening to our show who may want to comfort, people, loved ones in their lives and friends who have lost someone, what are healthy ways to kind of comfort someone who's grieving?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing would be to not let perfectionism get in the way of you showing up for somebody. I think sometimes we worry so much about like, oh my God, am I going to say the wrong thing? Am I going to do the wrong thing? That sometimes that really holds people back from like being present to that person. Because the truth is, like, you can always circle back. Like, you can always say, I wonder, I worry that what I said the other day wasn't helpful. I want to make sure I'm supporting you in the ways that I need to support you. So, like, remember, you are enough for that person. And when somebody is expressing their grief to you, really the most important thing to do is to listen and to ask questions if that's what they're wanting, and to really stay present. And if you're really wondering, oh my gosh, what does this person need right now? How do they want me to respond? It's okay to ask. I think for the person in grief to just be asked the open-ended question of like, how can I support you right now, can be extremely overwhelming. But to ask, would you like me to just repeat back to you what I'm hearing? Would you like me to stay silent? Would you like me to ask you more questions if I am curious about your experience more? That's a really great place to start. And I have a friend who runs a support group for people in grief. And one of the biggest things that I learned from her is, instead of asking a person like, oh, how are you? Ask them, how are you today? Because it really acknowledges the ever changing nature of grief. And I think for me, it just sounds more intentional for whatever reason. And then really try to avoid those pithy statements about, oh, they're in a better place, or, well, if you just remember all the good times that you had with this person. Because really, at the end of the day, what those statements do is they can send a message to the person in grief that their feelings are too uncomfortable for like someone to be in the presence of, and that they need to kind of like quote, get over it. That can really be like the implicit message in some of those like pithy kind of Pollyanna statements. And the third thing to remember is that the person in grief is going to need ongoing support. Often, all of the support comes, right, kind of within the first month or so. But really, it's, a year later, 2 years later, grief never goes away. And so really staying mindful and intentional about supporting that person in their grief as time goes on, and not being afraid to bring up the death or to bring up the loss. Because trust me, that person who's in grief, like it's not like you're reminding them of something that they've forgotten about and bringing it up. You're acknowledging it.
Right. And that really resonates with me, because I know that you had asked off air about the fact that people talked about a year of mourning in the Josefina books, mm-hmm. that kind of references like a general sense of ritualized mourning around marking time after the passage of a loved one. But I think in our world, there's a sense that people kind of put a time limit on grief. Like, okay, yeah, in the first month, I'm going to be really thinking about that. But not almost like, aren't you over it yet? But almost like this pressure to move on, and or to say like grief takes X amount of time, when in fact, grief and the amount of time people process it seems to be very individual and might actually be a lifetime.
Right, exactly. Like no two people experience grief in the same way. And, death is like obviously permanent. And so feelings are going to come up around that death, or if it's another type of loss, like throughout someone's lifespan. It could be, if somebody gets married, for example, it could be really triggered during that time. If there's another death or another loss of some sort, it could get triggered again. And sometimes grief can really come up in very unexpected times as well. I know, like both personally and professionally, like,
This episode is brought to you by Podcorn.
Podcorn is a marketplace connecting podcasters to advertisers for native podcast sponsorships.
What does that actually mean? Well, for our purposes, it means that we don't have to run ads on our show for products and services we don't believe in. We take this community really seriously, so we've in an ongoing way been trying to match with products that actually meet our mission and our values and are things that we're proud to support. So Podcorn has been a really wonderful service where we've been able to log on to their site and find a bunch of advertisers who want to work with us that we're excited to work with as well.
If you're a creator and you're looking for brands that you might want to work with, Podcorn is a great option. They have a marketplace mission to give podcasters transparency, creative freedom, and control, and you never give up exclusive rights to your podcast. Click the link in our show notes to learn how to sign up and to learn more about Podcorn.
That's right. So just head over to podcorn.com and get started today.
It can come up when people least expect it. Oh, I have a question for you guys. What other American girl do you think would be the ideal friend for Josefina?
Wow. Well, okay, I can't speak for Allison, but just kind of reiterating what we said before, reading the Felicity books, I am stunned at how little I remember from these plot lines and what these girls are actually like. So I don't know that I'm qualified to answer.
I think because I'm feeling the same way that y'all are feeling, but I don't know why. I guess I'm like, oh my God, y'all are historians. Y'all remember more.
I feel like we want Josefina to go on a living spree. So I think she needs Samantha's money, if not her friendship.
I think she needs Samantha's money, but maybe Felicity's devil may care attitude.
No, I don't think Felicity's right. My fear is that Felicity would be one of those people that's like, oh my God, I know when my gerbil died. That's my fear. That's my fear.
Well, and Samantha's an orphan, so she gets it. I just feel like Samantha, too, would be like, listen, this is what a good haircut looks like. Leave Mariana behind.
Allison, I think you're bringing your own haircut trauma into this. And I just want to note that you posted some really powerful images from a care and keeping of you recently on our Instagram about haircut trauma is what I'm calling it. I don't know what the professional term is, but
haircut shame resilience.
Do you have any? Is that what it's called?
That's what we're calling it. Haircut shame resilience.
Allison has that. She's been resilient through this summer of that haircut.
Good. That's awesome.
Well, I was a little surprised, and we've had a lot of people ask us if we connected with Care and Keeping of You and, what we made of it. And much like going back and reading the historical books, the advice in the 2002, early Care and Keeping of You, it seems very good.
It is. Okay. So I was a sophomore in high school in 2002. So it was not like Care and Keeping of You was, way past my time.
I think I'm your age, Allison. We must be the same age.
Yeah. I'm 33.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I just had a whole idea for a story. What if they had all the American girls, a book about all the American girls at the age of 33? That literally just popped in my head. Anyway, okay, I'm done with that. I would totally read that. But Care and Keeping of You. So I read the Feelings book, and honestly, admittedly, I was like, oh God, this is going to be a doozy. But it was so good. It was so good. The coping skills that they talk about are really wonderful. I mean, they borrow from dialectical behavior therapy, and they use progressive muscle relaxation and mindfulness. But then the words they have for it are really awesome, and they don't sound like therapy speak. Which when I work with adolescents and adults. And so when I'm working with my adolescents, TBH, I'm going to steal some of this language from these books because I think it is much more relatable than kind of a lot of names for those kind of coping strategies. One thing that it says in there that I thought was really, really great was they were talking about basically reaching out to others as a way to cope. But they said, don't let your chattiness keep you from figuring out how you really feel. That's wise. That's a wise, kind of dialectic to hold around, yes, reach out for connection and don't let that be a distraction from really going inside and listening in, as they call it. I'm very impressed. What did y'all think? Did y'all read them?
I had, I think, one or two of them, and we've since been collecting basically everything American Girl for the past year. So I have a pretty sizable pile of about 20 different ones now because they made a lot of different subject guides, I guess you could call it, for different topics. And then they have the Sticky Situation series. What I think, and again, not a professional opinion on these things, but I think taking the hair as an example, because that's a good template that they used. It tells you 5 or 6 different ways that you can cope or think about a bad haircut. And there's far more serious things in the book as well. But it also basically says it's going to take time, and or you may just decide that you're over it the next day, which I think is probably the best advice that a teenage person could hear.
Completely. Yeah. I mean, and I think this idea about seeking connection is great, but also sitting with your own feelings is so important, is in some ways even more vital now, because something that Allison and I reflect on is that, growing up with American Girl, the internet was just sort of AOL, came into my house when I was 10 or 11 years old, and then slowly got more and more invested, became a bigger part of my life. Yep. But now on social media, it's you can connect with anyone all the time about everything. But in some ways, that's there's all this research saying how isolating that actually is. But so in many ways, people are lonelier now, but also afraid to kind of sit with their own feelings. You almost need to check every decision with the populace before you figure out how you feel about something. Is that fair?
Yeah, I do. And I think another reason why I think social media is keeping people more lonely, and even texting and all of that, is because it's not a substitute for that face-to-face, in-person connection. And so you can tell whatever sort of vulnerable story that you want via a text, or express any sort of feeling that you want via, I don't know, Snapchat or whatever. But it's really not true vulnerability, because you're not seeing the nonverbal communication. You're just sort of putting it out there, and it never really fills that need
Yeah, so
that
I'm
you're
thinking
trying to
even with
meet.
grief, which we've been talking about, like even sharing condolences with someone, I think sometimes people will send a Facebook message or send an email because then maybe in some ways it's more comfortable for them. Like they don't have to be in that space and be uncomfortable with someone else's grief. But maybe that you're saying is not preferable to like something in person.
I mean, I think with things like grief, especially like condolences and stuff like that, I mean, it might even be
Right.
overwhelming for the person in grief to have all of that like in person. I mean, I think there can be for something like that, there can be like a practicality to it, I think. But I mean, I think you're right. I think it's sort of like the person that will post this like Facebook memorial post for someone that that they barely knew, but then like won't show up to the funeral. You're right. It's sort of like I'm gonna do this because it like sort of checks a box off, but like it's not that uncomfortable.
I think Josefina would be like an Instagram girl, and she would have just like only happy photos of her out with the goats or wandering through the mountains. Like it would be a symptom of her suppression.
Wow.
Ooh.
That's dark.
Ooh.
Do you think she would appear in her own
Wow.
Instagram or it would just be of goats and like scenic views?
I don't think she would appear in it. I think it would be goats and scenic views and like happy
So
birthday
true.
posts to her
Yeah, that's
friends.
tough.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Or like I want to like thanking people all the time. You know, I want Josefina to be okay. I want her to be okay. I think she more than any other girl
100%. I
needed
wish they'd
those
come out
care
a
and
little
keeping of you
sooner for
books.
our age group, or maybe they did and I
I
just
think
didn't
she
have
needed.
access to them. I remember there was like parts of them in the
No,
magazine,
I
or
don't think
remember
they
the
did.
magazine had the advice column in the back, and I really, really loved that.
Yeah, yeah. No, that advice column was really good. Um, there were some things. So in the feelings book, there were a couple things that I'm like, oh, it would be great if this could be updated or changed. And that's like they didn't include shame in the like feelings
Wow.
list, which is such a primitive emotion. But I mean, because I like it's one of my specialty areas. Like I really pick up on like where shame is not included in like lists of emotions or in any sort of emotional literacy work. And like it wasn't in the movie Inside Out. I went over to my friend's house last night and she got these like generation mindful posters for her kid and they had like a list of feelings on there. Shame wasn't on there. But it literally is like it is the core like pain of the human experience is like believing that my flaws make me unworthy of love and belonging. And it can be like it's the most dysregulating emotion. So I don't know. I would add a chapter about like shame and also helping girls identify the difference between like shame and guilt and embarrassment. Because there are big differences between the three and they're like often used interchangeably when
Can you tell us?
they're very
Sorry, I
different.
feel like I need to know that. I actually don't know.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's actually four self-conscious affects. There's shame, guilt, humiliation, and embarrassment. And so embarrassment, it can feel like, oh my gosh, I just want to melt in the moment, but we have enough awareness to know like, okay, this is like going to be funny someday. Like people sit around at parties and we'll talk about like, oh, what's your most embarrassing moment? Like as an icebreaker, but like nobody sits around at parties and talks about like, hey, what's the most shameful thing that like ever happened to you in your life? That's embarrassment. Um, Humiliation can be very similar to shame, but like we know that we didn't deserve it. So humiliation would be like if we get if like a teacher or a coach or a boss like yells at us in front of a bunch of people, but we're like, gosh, that felt horrible, but we'll usually like tell somebody about it without much issue because we know like that was not okay and we didn't deserve that. Guilt is really a very like healthy emotion that serves a really good purpose. Guilt is when we've done something that is out of line with our own value system and therefore like drives us to make amends. Like it's a warning bell. It's that feeling of like, ooh, God, that really hurt somebody and that is that is not what I want to bring to the world. And then shame is, like I said, that fear of disconnection, or that fear that we are so flawed that we're unworthy of love and belonging. And so, like, when Josefina broke that vase, like, a guilt response would have been like, oh, wow, like, okay, like, I broke that. And that would have motivated her to more readily go to Tia Magdalena and say, like, I am so sorry I did this. Like, what can I do to make it up to you? But I mean, shame is where she went, where she really started questioning, like, her identity and, like, her worth as a person. And I think grief is really related to the shame that, like, she experiences in that moment too, because it made, like, I think the death of her mom made the stakes so high. Like, it wasn't just like, oh, I broke this vase. It was like, I broke this vase, and, like, one of, and then my aunt, who is, like, one of the only, like, I've already lost, like, my mother. Like, I don't want to lose an aunt too. And that's not really said in the book, but I kind of can't help but wonder. Like, I was like, okay, this is about, like, a lot more than I think she's aware of in this moment. So those are the differences between those self-conscious affects. And I think it's really, like, helpful for everybody to know the distinction, because, again, the first step in staying resilient to shame is being able to, like, identify it and
exactly. And I think that I'm wondering if you can recommend, if our listeners are our age or thereabouts, some are younger than us, if you've grown up in a situation where you've felt a lot of shame or you feel a lot of guilt and you're not really sure how to deal with that, the ways that therapy can help you learn some of these healthier coping mechanisms.
Yes. So, book-wise, I would recommend Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. And then she also has another great book called Rising Strong. Daring Greatly really focuses on like, kind of how to, like, move through shame to, like, really, like, show up, be seen, and, like, live brave in the world. And then Rising Strong really focuses on what do you do to, like, get back up after a fall. So those are the two books that I would recommend, Daring Greatly and Rising Strong by Brene Brown. And if someone is really wanting to do work with a therapist around shame, and there's a really big tie between shame and grief. So I would even if it feels more like grief for you, or that's your experience right now, I would still recommend that you visit thedaringway.com to find a therapist who's licensed in Brene Brown's work in your area.
That's amazing advice. And we have a really serious question about, we've just read through a lot of fan fiction, so we know that our listeners dream really big. And we just want you to dreamcast and or provide a pivotal plot point from a Josefina screenplay. So, like, if you could pull all your interests together, like, who are you going to cast in the Josefina story when it hits the big screen?
Oh my gosh, I am so bad at this, but I'm going to...
We believe in you. We believe in you.
We'll just say this, like, in this universe, J-Lo is available to play Tia D.
Okay. Yeah, I can get on board with that. This sounds horrible. Is Chita Rivera still alive?
I believe so.
I think she is. I just would love Chita Rivera to, like, play Tia Magdalena. So yes, that's the musical theater geek in me, probably more than anything. But I would love to see Demi Lovato play one of the sisters.
Wow, I love that.
Like, and Selena Gomez, like, they can have, like, they can be reunited and playing the sister. Like, they can each play a sister. Playing Josefina, I'm so just, like, not. I don't even know any child actors that are like I don't know who they are now. I don't even know. Oh my gosh, I know, I've got it. That little girl on This Is Us. Mackenzie Hack, it's Hanczi. Oh no, wait, Hanccissak. but her. I think she would be a precious Josefina.
Wow. And can I suggest, I mean, and this is your casting, but Edward James Olmos for Abuelito, because if he's anything as passionate about El Camino Royale as he is about teaching calculus in that other movie, which name I can't remember right now. Allison, do you remember what that movie is called?
Stand and Deliver?
Yes.
No?
Did you see
I
that?
saw it years ago. And
when I was in high school, anytime our teacher didn't want to teach math, she made us watch that movie. So I've seen it like 3 times. Also, it was not a calculus class. I don't know if that matters, but I've come to really believe in his talent. And I feel like if you gave him the nod, he wouldn't disappoint you.
Yeah. Yes.
That is it.
Yeah. Wow. Perfect. Well, I mean, this has been quite a journey. Thank you so much. And can you tell us where people can find you if they want to share their Enneagram opinions and whatnot?
Yes, please do reach out. You can find me on Instagram at Allison Marek. That's ALLISON, M as in Mary, AREK. And my website is www.allisonmarek.com.
All right, there you have it. Thanks so much for listening to our first Care and Keeping of You episode. As always, we love hearing from you. I just got an email the other day asking for my thoughts on One Tree Hill and a different message asking about medical humanities. Allison gets so many awesome messages on our Instagram and Twitter accounts and Facebook, so please do keep in touch with us. You can find Allison at Allison Harricks on Insta and Twitter. You can find me at Mary Mahoney123 on Twitter and at Mimi Mahoney on Insta. And you can find the show on Facebook and on Instagram at American Girls Podcast and on Twitter at A Girls Pod. We love hearing from you, and we can't wait for our next adventure when we meet Kirsten. We've already heard from many of you who are excited to start this next series, and we are too. Thanks for listening.
I earned my degree online at Arizona State University. I chose to get my degree at ASU because I knew that I'd get a quality education, they were recognized for excellence, and that I would be prepared for the workforce upon graduating. To be associated with ASU, both as a student and alum, it makes me extremely proud, and having experienced the program, I know now that I'm set up for success. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 350 plus programs at asuonline.asu.edu.